Hey, I'm Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the new generation XC bikes from KTM versus the XCW bikes. There's some changes that have happened, and it's been a while since I've done one of these videos. Let's get into it. Hey, real quick before I get too deep into this, I'm giving both the 24 XCW away and the 23 250 XC away. All you have to do to get entered, and that's for the month of September, is go to my website, buy a hat, buy a shirt, buy anything else I've got up there, and it enters you automatically in to win both of those two bikes, which will be going away in September. So if you haven't done that, go to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, or click the link down in the description and get entered. Okay, how you doing? It's been a minute since I've done an XC versus XCW comparison video, and a lot of things have changed on these bikes, and I'm gonna be talking specifically about the 2024 KTM XC and XCW line. The 23 XCs, which is this bike right here, also it has they're pretty much the same, the 23s and the 24s. This is the 24 XC, 300 XC. I've got the suspension off because we're doing some stuff, and this is a 24 XCW. So I'm gonna be saying XC when I point this way. This is a 23, but we're talking about the 23s and the 24s, and I'll say the XCW over here. So there's been some definite changes to these things, and I wanna enumerate some of the things that have changed and some of the differences that we have. First off, I should say though, I'm talking about the TBI, the throttle body injected motors on both of these bikes. It's kind of like the second gen of KTM's fuel injection, okay? So I'm gonna highlight a few things that are different that might help you decide which one you want to buy. And the reason I think that's important is because now more than ever, I do think that the XCWs and the XCs have actually been separated further than they had in the past. I mean, in the past, they had different gearing and some different things, but now I think KTM has actually moved these things further apart, where one is more for enduro, hard enduro type stuff, trail riding, and aggressive trail riding on the XCWs, and one is more for like cross-country racing and super hard charging, crazy hard charging, like desert races, super fast, wide open stuff, and that's the XCs. Whereas in the past, I think the XC was it was more towards the middle. Now the XC is way out here, kind of like the SX bikes, and the XCW is further over here on the other side of things. So let's talk about some of the things here. Okay, the first difference I want to highlight is the XC bike is a pre-mix bike. You have to pre-mix the oil in the fuel on the XC bikes. There's no oil pump, there's no oil injection. Versus on the XCWs, there is an oil reservoir here and an oil pump, and it's injecting the oil into the mix for you. So you can go at an XCW, you can go directly to a pump and put pump gas in this thing. Whereas on the XCs, like right here, you're going to be mixing the oil in the fuel. I'm fine either way. I've never had an oil pump fail on any of the TPI bikes or the TBI bikes, but some people don't like that, racers, or sometimes a little bit more particular. And so on an XC, you'll be pre-mixing your gas. The next thing I want to talk about is the engine mapping. So in the past, XC versus XCW, they were pretty much mapped the same as far as how the power was delivered. I could really never tell much of a difference. Now there is a huge difference. The XC bikes, like here, they are mapped super hot. I've never seen two strokes that were mapped hotter and more aggressive than the 23 and the 24 XC bikes. They are fire freaking breathing dragons, but you don't get a ton of traction out of it especially if you're doing like hard enduro type stuff. So the XCW has been mapped more gentle, and it's been mapped more for traction. And it's actually really fantastic in the single track stuff, on hill climbs and things like that. It is probably a better mapped bike than they've ever had it for general riding. But it isn't as fire breathing dragon as the XCs. And so the mapping is very different. The XCs are crazy aggressive. And if you're gonna be doing hard enduro stuff, you're gonna probably struggle for traction on the XC bikes, because it's just gonna light that wheel up. This motor is so intense, it's going to light that rear wheel up like that. Versus on the XCW, it's not gonna light the wheel up so much. Anytime you're doing hard enduro stuff, soft enduro stuff, whatever, XCW is gonna be better mapped for that. I should probably also mention, if you want to support what we're doing here, probably the best way to do it is use my links to Rocky Mountain ATV. They are the best in the business. They have all kinds of cool stuff. Their pricing can't be beat, and it's free shipping on orders over $75. And if I'm doing a sweepstakes, like here in the month of September, anytime you click and place an order for Rocky Mountain ATV using my links, it automatically enters you into the sweepstakes for these bikes. So go buy your parts and gear from Rocky Mountain ATV using my affiliate links. Go to dirtbikechannel.com. It's one of the menu items that says Shop Rocky Mountain ATV. Okay, go. Another big difference between the XC bike and the XCW bike is the XC has linkage. That's the linkage on the rear suspension. The XCW has a PDS style rear suspension, which has no linkage. This is something that they've always had in the past. That's always been the difference between the two. And I prefer the PDS style with no linkage for probably most of my riding, especially when you're dropping off ledges. You don't catch your linkage. If you're going up over logs or rocks or things like that, you don't catch the linkage. And so most of the time I prefer this. And if I've got the bike set up with the correct amount of sag and the bike is set up properly, I can't tell the difference in trail riding situations and enduro situations. It's really hard for me to tell the difference, but I do notice if I get hung up on things. So on the XC, it's got that linkage there. It shares that with the SX or the motocross bikes, and it's made to go hard charging, super fast. That's what the suspension is for on the XCs. I mean, overall, the XC is just a much stiffer suspension. Even on the front, they have the closed cartridge exact forks right now, which is a spring fork in 24 on both bikes, but the XCW is valved more soft. And for most of the riding that I'm doing, the XCW actually has a better valving for what I want to do, because it's a little bit less stiff valving. Your XC is going to be stiff. These bikes are stiff, okay, because they're made to go fast. So even more than ever, the XC bikes are good for, like, if you had a bike that you wanted to be able to take to the track one day and then take to a desert type situation the next day. The XCs have probably gotten better than ever for that, because it is a stiffer fork, it's a stiffer rear suspension than the XCW. So XCW soft, XC hard is kind of the thing to think about as far as suspension goes. Another big difference that used to not be is the stators. That's how much electricity the bikes are charging the battery back up with. The XC bikes now share the stator with the motocross bikes. It's not a high output stator. So when you get the XCs now here, you really can't run anything else. You can't really run a headlight. You can't really run a fan. Like, I do have a fan on both of these bikes, but if it runs very much, you are at risk of running that battery dead. Because if the fan is running, there's not enough power to run most of the fans and even a lot of the headlights. And you definitely you can't run a headlight and a fan on an XC bike without having the stator rebuilt, rewired. You could contact Ricky Stator. They can do that for you. But on the XCW, it's got a much higher output stator. And so the XCW can run any of these accessories, headlight, fan, all at the same time. And even if you wanted a GPS or whatever, the XCW has a better stator for what we're doing. It sucks that the XCs don't have that stator from the factory, because they used to. It used to be on an XC, you could run basically anything you wanted. But starting in 23 and 24 model years of the XCs, you can't do that. It's got the motocross stator, which isn't enough. It isn't enough to run more than basically just what's on the bike, by default, which is the spark plug and your fuel pump is essentially all it can really run. You put any other load on it within reason, it's not a good enough stator for that. One of the last things I'll talk about, or maybe the last thing I'll talk about, is the XC is just geared a little bit higher. They have the same internal components. It used to be, the XC, one of the reasons why the XC used to be my favorite bike, I loved the transmission on it. It wasn't a wide ratio transmission. It was a very linear, we called it a semi-close ratio, and I loved it. But in 23 and 24, it now shares, from what I can tell, the exact same gearbox with the XCW. And it's not the same, this isn't the same, the XCW doesn't have the same gearbox it had before, but now the two platforms share what I think is the same internals on the transmission, but the final drive is different. Whereas on the XCW, it comes with like a 13 tooth on the front and a 45 tooth on the rear. And on your XCs, you have a 14 tooth on the front and a 48 tooth on the rear. So it's just slightly different gearing. The XC is going to be geared a little bit higher from what I can tell, but your transmissions are the same. So again, XC is made to go just a little bit faster, a little bit higher geared. And I mean, some of you guys may argue with me on the ratios, because it's weird. You've got a different front tooth, you've got a different tooth on the front, different tooth on the rear. I haven't done the math on these things. When I ride them, I feel like the XC is just a little bit faster as far as the gearing, a little bit higher geared from what I can feel, and it's definitely set up with the suspension to go faster. So again, these things have now kind of been separated more than they ever were before. The XC is meant to go fast. It doesn't run accessories. The XCW is made to go slower. The XC is mapped super hot and super aggressive, whereas the XCW is mapped a little bit smoother, a little bit less aggressive. They both make crazy amounts of power. These bikes both make more power than basically any of us really need, but it's fun to have that power on tap, you know? So that's what I've got for you. If you want to support these videos, the best way to do it is use my links for Rocky Mountain ATV. It's down in the video description and it's over on my website, dirtbikechannel.com. And if you haven't entered already, I'm giving these two bikes away. Here's the 23 XC, 23 250 XC, and this is the 24 300 XCW. I'm giving both those bikes away here in the month of September, so you should get in on that. And until next time, leave a single track.